constructed these walls.
Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson, and this week we welcome back the incredible Tony Jones. It's been a few years since we last spoke to Tony, and obviously a lot has happened since then. We get into all that, including his brand new book, The God of Wild Places, Rediscovering the Divine in the Untamed Outdoors. But before we get to that, hopefully at this point, at the time that you are currently presently listening to this podcast, hopefully the website has been fixed. So our good friend and website guy, Ryan Battles, has been hard at work getting the new domain name running. So what essentially happened was there was a colossal mix-up with the expiration of our domain name. And so without us knowing, the domain name expired, and some unusual company grabbed it. And as a few of you have astutely noticed and let me know, there's all sorts of strange sort of things popping up on the website now. So what we did is we bought a new domain name that is almost identical. So it's www.thedeconstructionist.org now, as opposed to .com. So just slightly different domain name. Hopefully at this point, though, the new one is up and running. It should look identical, have all the same content. You can still go there to support us on Patreon. You can snag some merch with new international shipping, read our blog, or stream any of our episodes for free. And, you know, in the spirit of our technological nightmare this month, the good old podcast laptop that we have been using for pretty close to 7 years now finally died. And so we had to buy brand new equipment there. And so, unfortunately, unbeknownst to us at the time, but while recording with Tony and some other guests too, we had some issues with our recording website. We couldn't figure out what it was, thought it was the website. Turns out it was the laptop that was in its final legs. And so if you listen very carefully, you can hear the final death throes of our laptop. But no, just kidding. You can't hear anything. But unfortunately, it caused some issues with the recording. We switched over to another recording platform that we use as a backup, and hopefully you don't notice a huge difference, but if you notice a slight change in the sound quality after the first 5 minutes, it's because we had to switch platforms. But hopefully I think everything turned out okay. It sounds good, and you get to hear Tony, and that's what's important. So let's get on with it, though. Back to Tony. Tony is an outdoorsman, a theologian, professor, former pastor, and award-winning writer. He's written over a dozen books, including The Sacred Way, Spiritual Practices for Everyday Life, hosts the Reverend Hunter Podcast, teaches writing classes, mentors novice hunters, and guides canoe trips in the Boundary Waters. He holds degrees from Dartmouth College, Fuller Theological Seminary, Princeton Theological Seminary. He is also the co-project leader on a 2023 to 2026 Templeton Foundation funded study, Making Meaning in a Post-Religious America. Tony is married, has 3 children and 2 dogs, and lives in Edina, Minnesota. And we could not be more excited to have him back on the podcast. So without further ado, I give you Tony freaking Jones. All right, welcome back again to the Deconstructionist Podcast. So fill us in real quick on what you've been up to. You said you were still doing a little bit of teaching at Fuller.
I'm teaching a little bit at Fuller. I teach in the Doctor of Ministry program. I don't know. They haven't read my new book yet, so we'll see. It's hard. It's really hard for me to gauge how people will receive it, you know. What else do? I teach at the Loft Literary Center here in the Twin Cities. I do some freelance writing. I'm in a big project on the nuns, which I should probably come back on with you once that's finished, with Ryan Burge. He and I got a big grant from the John Templeton Foundation. We're doing the largest ever survey of American nuns, about 15,000 nuns. So we're really going to know more about the non-religiously affiliated Americans than ever before. And I'm doing with a mutual friend, Trip Fuller, doing a little podcast retrospective on the emerging church movement. So that's been a ton of fun. We've worked really hard on that, and people seem to really like it. It was such an important time in many of our lives. So it's fun to go back and talk to old friends, listen to archival audio and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's taking me back to like my Phyllis Tickle days and you know, some of those great thinkers. So very cool. Yeah, you'll definitely have to come back and talk about that. New book though, let's definitely touch on that. Really cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of our friend Diana Butler Bass, who's talked about not extensively, I don't think, to this level, but definitely has talked about sort of finding God in places other than, you know, the brick building that we call the church, and finding God sort of out in nature and reconnecting with the divine in that way. So talk to people a little bit about what initially inspired this book.
Well, I mean, my life circumstances are what really drove it. I went through a divorce in 2008, 2009, and then 5 years after that, went through a big custody fight. And those were kind of 1-2 punches. I think in the book, I talk about it like when you go, if you're a landlocked person like me in Minnesota and you go to the beach, you know, for spring break, and you go play in the waves, and it's like a first wave kind of knocked me to my knees, but then the second wave, like, what do they call it when you get whirlpooled? You know, you get just churned around like you're in a washing machine. So yeah, I kind of had a double whammy, and by 2015. You know, it's probably about when I came on your podcast last time to promote my last book, which was called Did God Kill Jesus? Everything. I mean, I don't know what metaphor. The rug got pulled out from under me. You know, the pins got knocked down or whatever. It was a car wreck, you know, and the church. I mean, I know your listeners. I can probably guess your listeners have some feelings about the church, and the church, you know, I remember in seminary, they taught us it's a hospital for sinners, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, remember that phrase? And I think the church is a lot of times good at helping people who are hurting. It's not real good at helping pastors who are hurting, especially kind of C-list celebrity pastors, which probably is what I was, you know, writing books and speaking and traveling and stuff like that. So yeah, I didn't have a lot of support for what I was going through, and I ended up going outside. I just went outside, and I found myself drawn more and more to going outside. And I hunt a lot, and I fish and hike and paddle a canoe, and that really became a place for me for where I could heal. And then, you know, I've just always been a writer. I've been writing a long time, and I've written a lot of books. So it's just the way I process, you know, the way I process what I'm going through. And this book, over the course of about 10 years, you know, on and off, I wrote it. So that was the inspiration, is like, you know, John, it's funny because all my other books have kind of been like, hey, here's how you should pray. Here's how you should understand the doctrine of the atonement. They were kind of teaching tools. And this one is kind of like, I wrote this one for me to process it. And it's not, this is interesting. This is interesting because one of my friends who read it, and I was struggling with how to write it. And my agent, Jonathan Merritt, he said, go back and read some Barbara Brown Taylor.
Yeah.
And so I was rereading Barbara Brown Taylor, right? The greatest. She's the greatest.
So good. Yep.
Oh my gosh. And I happen to know her a little bit, and I texted her and I said, I notice you never say in the book, in your book, like Learning to Walk in the Dark, you never say, you should.
Yeah.
You should do this, or you ought. You're never directive to the reader. And I'm trying to figure out how to write in a way that is like about truth and spirituality, but it's not prescriptive. And she wrote back, I mean, it was just so classic. She goes, should is male language. Women don't talk like that.
Wow.
I was like, God dang it.
That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm an Enneagram 8, so I'm kind of a strong personality anyway. And then I get the Ph.D. in theology from Princeton, and then I write the books and travel and speak, and I'm you should. I'm shoulding on people all the time. And then everything falls apart, and then now I'm like, how do I write? How do I write differently? So that was a big part of this process.
What a cool observation, and what a cool, I think probably the instinct, I would imagine. I'm not a writer. I wouldn't know. I dabble, I would say, but certainly not a published author. But I would imagine the instinct is, once you sort of find your writing voice, is to kind of stick with that, and to sort of change that through an observation like that, deep into your career, has got to be difficult, and maybe even a little frightening, a little scary when you put it out there.
Oh, dude, super scary. On the one hand, I have, there are moments about my writing, and another guy you maybe have had on, Mark Scandrette, he's a guy who's written books and does a lot of speaking and whatever. And I remember he read a book of mine 2 books ago called The New Christians, which was about the emerging church movement. And there's a section in there about me going to a chicken kill plant, which is, I kind of reprise it actually in this book. I wrote it up differently, but he when he read that book, The New Christians, he's like, that is how you should write. That is the best writing I've ever read of yours. And he's read, everything. And I thought, well, that's weird. Don't you want to read when I write about theology? You want me to describe going to a plant where they're killing chickens and making, and wrapping them up in saran wrap or whatever? And he's like, no, that was a fully realized scene. So that, comments like that gave me a little wind in my sails for writing this book, because this book is much more a series of fully realized scenes from my life, as opposed to kind of a didactic teaching on a particular topic. So yes, it was challenging, but for sure, I also had friends along the way who were like, no, that's actually when you're at your best, not when you're preaching about the cross, but when you're telling stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've said this for years. I think it's fun, and I think it's really interesting to have, heavy duty academics on and philosophize and try to think about things that, are beyond our understanding. Certainly very fun. But I think the things we found, early on, that the episodes that connected best with our listeners are the ones who are telling a story about how, their struggles and things that are identifiable. I think, like how you move in the world despite all the obstacles that we confront every day. And I think that's, and I failed to mention the name of the book. I should give the name of the book, The God of Wild Places, Rediscovering the Divine in the Untamed Outdoors. And I think you really succeeded in that. Every chapter is sort of like following your personal journey and sort of trying to figure out where to go from that place where you're at, which was, like the rest of us. Sometimes the world feels like it's shitting on you, and you're like, okay, how do I proceed from here? What does my life look like now that it's not what I thought it was going to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wrote it, it's went through many different iterations. And it was much more of a traditional chronological memoir 5 years ago. Like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And again, Jonathan Merritt, who was kind of saying, let's try to shape this book more like a Barbara Brown Taylor book, it became much more thematic. So each, like you're saying, it's generally chronological, but each chapter is around a theme. So, there's a chapter on risk, there's a chapter on peace, there's a chapter on dogs. And obviously dogs have been a part of my life, through the whole process. I mean, I tell basically 25 years worth of dog stories, but they're brought together in one chapter. So yeah, it's part of the creative process. And frankly, COVID bought me some time to do that.
Yeah.
It gave me some space to figure out how to best tell that story.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And one of the things, I wanted to ask you about at the beginning of the book, you kind of mentioned something that I've found to be absolutely true, more so today than even before. I think back in 2016, we first had you on, sort of the term deconstruction, this French philosophy term, had just started to be sort of like linked to those coming out of a more fundamentalist version of Christianity, and sort of kind of pulling the pieces apart to try to figure out, like, what do I actually believe? And now it's kind of in the common vernacular, and there's a million other podcasts out there now, whereas back then there were probably a handful. But I found this to be really interesting when you mentioned back then that anytime you picked a fight with somebody online or whatever, you would see your numbers jump. And I feel like that's even more true now. I see the larger podcasts, the ones that have far surpassed anything we've ever done, are the ones that like are really rooted in sort of anger and snark. And I thought, you mentioned that in your book, and I thought, yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing. Like even more so today and mass. And it's sort of disheartening a little,
Oh, dude. And I mean, the thing is about it, John, is like that came back and bit me in the ass.
Yeah.
Basically, because I was known to be this like super feisty, angry, theologically sharp blogger with pointy elbows, you know what I mean? And trying to draw blood. And if I wrote an angry thing about Mark Driscoll or Rob Bell or whatever, numbers would go up. And then, when I went through some bad stuff, everyone was like, well, he's kind of an asshole, so he must deserve it. Like that was my online persona.
Oh man.
It's not necessarily who I am, but I present as an Enneagram 8, I can present that way to the world. So that also it did not serve me well. It served me well to launch my career and make me kind of semi-famous in the Christian blogosphere and the speaking circuit and get publishers real interested in me. But for me personally, it was toxic. It was terrible. And yeah, so now I see people, it's harder and harder with more and more media out there. And now you can't even count on Twitter to like spread the news of your latest episode of your podcast, right? So you make it even more clickbaity and everything's in all caps, and you post it 3 or 4 or 5 times to try to get people to, I'm in the middle of doing that for my book, sadly, to try to get, some attention on it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's vicious. It's like I felt there were times, and it's why I've kind of retrograded more to writing books. I do write a Substack once a week, but at the peak, I was posting on my blog 11 posts a week. Wow. So twice a day on weekdays and once on Saturday. And then if you remember the blogging days, it was like where all the bloodshed happened was in the comments section. 100%. And the more, if you responded to the comments that people left on your blog, they kept coming back multiple times during the day. Yeah. Because they're like, let's see the train. Let's see the train wreck in Tony's comment section or Rachel Held Evans' comment section or whatever. Yeah. People. It became a full, and it was like it was like shoveling coal, into the locomotive. Like, and it's always hungry for more coal. You'll never satisfy the locomotive. Oh my gosh, it's tiring even thinking about it now.
Well, and I think the reason that Adam and I early on, we were trying to figure out what exactly this was or what it was going to become, tried to kind of steer clear of that because for one, it's easy. There's plenty of stuff to get pissed off about for sure. And it's not like we don't have those same feelings, like very frustrated, especially in today's climate with Christians doing one thing, saying they believe one thing, but doing another, being the most obvious one. But it just felt like it wasn't a good place to stay. Like there's plenty of reasons for a lot of people coming out of kind of a more of a restrictive, harmful, hurtful, religious background to be pissed. Like, yeah, every reason to be pissed, but like, it didn't feel like a good place to stay. And ultimately it never felt like a vehicle that was ever going to change anyone's mind about anything.
Right.
it just felt fruitless.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like,
no, it's like a mutual admiration society. A lot of times in those circles, like, you know, you're like trying to like out traumatize one another, and you know, or you're like, oh, you think the Theo bro you posted about in the Facebook group is bad yesterday. Let me tell you the one I'm going to post about today,
right?
You know, or whatever. And then I've been that Theo bro that people have been posting about and angry about, and it's toxic, man. I mean, I don't know. I got thrown out. You know, I didn't choose to leave my profession. I didn't choose to leave that world. I got tossed out. But of course, you know, you look back when stuff like that happens. It's a little bit like, as someone who's divorced, and I have many friends who are in like really bad marriages, and they're like, I just don't think I could go through the pain of a divorce. And I'm like, yeah, divorce sucks, no doubt. But I'm telling you, like, being in a bad marriage really sucks. And
way worse.
Like, the divorce ends at some point, is over. Like, the bad marriage doesn't end. And I think it's like that. It's hard for people to tap out of some of those communities. But yeah, I mean, I just encourage any of your listeners who are part of those communities where it's just one toxic post after another. There's so much better ways to spend your time.
Absolutely.
Go outside, take a walk in nature.
Yes.
You know, go fly fishing, do something, for God's sake.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. So in the book, you hit on this thing that I thought was really interesting, where you talk about the way in which we view God and how a lot of us grew up thinking about God in the sense that God is this thing that exists outside of us. But then you talk about this Eastern idea called theosis. So describe for listeners the idea of theosis and how it changes not only the way that we view God, but ultimately the way we view everything.
Yeah. Well, it's the contrast is what most of us grew up with, and that's anybody really who grew up Protestant or Catholic grew up with the idea that God is the sovereign other. And look, there's all sorts of theological reasons for that. There's lots of biblical backing for that. You know, you kind of think that was the view, pretty much that was the view of Yahweh among the Israelites. There's always this thing of like, oh yeah, God, I mean, Jesus is in my heart, or the Holy Spirit indwells me. But really, like, if you like waterboarded most Protestants, in the end, they'd be like, no, God is sovereign other. God is sovereign other. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's so deep, man. I mean, I talk in the book, I think about, or maybe I just thought about writing it in the book, but you know, it's even the like the NFL, you know, the wide receiver scores a touchdown, and first thing he does is point up. Like, God's up and out there.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't point to him. If he points to himself, you're like, what an arrogant prick, you know?
Right. But
mostly they're pointing up and out. Like, God's out there. Yay, God. God, you're doing something from outside to help me out. And in Orthodoxy, they just don't think, I mean, I don't think they wouldn't say God's not sovereign, but they would not say God is up and out. God is this other outside being, because there really is this theological understanding that God dwells within every human being. And it's this, the Greek word for it is theosis, which is, you know, basically if you went to a Protestant seminary like I did, that was something you were never taught. I mean, it's something I learned about post-seminary, self-educated myself on it. And it just means that God dwells within you. God dwells within you. And there's this very famous, you know, theological saying in Orthodoxy, God became, you know, it's sadly, it's genderized, but God became man so that man might become God. And a lot of times you'll see that rephrase like, God became man so man could become like God. But that's not what it is in Greek. It's like they actually believe. And that's what's so funny is for those of us who grew up Protestant or Catholic, You're like, no. We can't become God. We can't become, that's pantheism or something like that.
Right.
And no, that's not. I mean, they have a much more, the Orthodox have a much more sophisticated understanding of that. And yeah, I mean, I would encourage any of your listeners who wants to read like John Zizoulas, who's a great Orthodox theologian of the 20th century. You can read, it's not that hard to find material and read it and just be like, oh, there's another perspective. Nobody taught me that in Bible college, you know?
Yeah, I feel that way all the time. One of the interesting things that you made me think of is when we think of God sort of outside of us, I feel like that crops up every single time that we are experiencing suffering of some kind. And I think about like, God, like every time there's a school shooting, you know, because it links back to that idea of like, God loves us. Why would he allow bad things to happen? As if God's out there somewhere and just looking down over us and just allowing this terrible stuff to happen.
Yeah. My favorite Christian theologian is Jürgen Moltmann, and he, you know, he was a German soldier in World War II. And he came to faith after he was captured, and he was in an Allies not concentration camp, like a prisoner of war camp. Mm-hmm. And that's where he came to faith, actually. But he uses this story that's become very famous. That's like, you know, of during the Holocaust, of all these Jews in a concentration camp being forced to watch an execution of a bunch of teenage boys. And somebody in the crowd says, "Where is God?" As though God is this outside other, right? Yeah. And then he hears another voice say, "God is there on the gallows." Like God is about to be hanged with those boys.
Yeah.
God isn't up and out, external sovereign. God is like right here with us in the midst of our suffering. And it was that, you know, that informs all of Moltmann's theology and has informed my theology. So it really, what it does is try to break down that idea that God's external to us. But no, God is like in the suffering with us.
Size of our buildings become the foundation we laid. No church, tell me what made us think that we could keep others away in the name of some so-called safety. 'Cause we sold our souls for a little bit of power and control, and we left a hole, and those we're called to love. Oh, church, what have we done? No church, when will we ever see? Until we're all treated the same, that nobody is actually free. Oh, church, I guess they're not enough. Oh, church, what have we done? But there is hope, somewhere to go, someone to feed, someone to lead, someone to clothe. And who are we, if not redeemed, bringers of peace and justice, sweet and holy love? Oh, church, what have we done? No, church, what have we done? May we sell our souls to be rid of all the power and control. May we lose ourselves for those we're called to love. Oh, church, let that be us.